It is so good to see you guys today. If you are joining us online, I want to welcome you as well. If you're in other venues in our building on campus, I want to say welcome. My name is Gabe, and I serve as the Director of Spiritual Formation for Springfield Christian School, which is a partner ministry that we have here. And before we dive into God's Word today, I just want to ask you one thing. Would you pray for Springfield Christian School this year? Would you pray for all of our teachers, all of our administrators, all of the schools in our area? We are about to launch into our school year in a time that is unprecedented, in a territory that we are going to that's unknown for this school year. And so I would just ask that you would pray for all of our schools this year. That would be awesome. I can vividly remember when I was in high school, sitting around a campfire at Little Galley Christian Camp in Clinton, Illinois, and hearing a story that went a little bit like this. The story was about another high school boy who had fallen head over heels in love, he thought in love, with a girl in his hometown. And he wanted to find out if they could go on a date. And so he pulled out his phone. Not like this one. This was way before the times of cell phones and social media. He actually pulled out a phone that was cordless, but it still had a cord that went to the wall. Students, if you don't know what that is, ask your parents, all right? He called this young lady up, and they set up a time for him to come to her house to pick her up on what would be their first date. And as he walked to the door, he knocked on the door. And you know who answered the door, right? It was her father. He wanted to have a conversation with this young lad before they went out on their date. And the conversation went like this. He said, "I don't care where you go. As a matter of fact, I don't really care what you do. Here's my one rule. I need to have my daughter back in my house in 5 minutes." 5 minutes? I mean, the guy thought it was a little absurd, but he was so smitten with this young lady that he agreed. So they left, and by golly, in 5 minutes, they came back. The dad said, "Thank you," shut the door, the guy went on his way. Day after day, the rules never changed. And friends, their relationship wasn't growing much. Their idea of who they were and this whole idea, it wasn't going anywhere. And so after several dates, if you could really call them dates, the guy gave up and he broke up with this young lady and moved on. And as I was sitting there listening to this story at the campfire, it was at that point that the guy that was telling the story asked this question: "Is that what you are doing with Jesus? Are you only giving Jesus 5 minutes of your time every so often?" Friends, what about the face time that we're giving with Jesus? You and me, how much face time does Jesus get in our week? I think as we move through the text today, we're going to realize that maybe we need to spend a little bit more time with Jesus. If I were to take a poll today and talk to every single one of you in this room, all of you that are online, I think that all of us, including myself, would fall in one of these three different camps about where we spend our time. The first camp are those of you that spend the majority of your time with non-Christians. That's just the way it works out for you. You spend almost all of your waking hours with people who don't believe that Jesus is God's son. Maybe it's your family situation. Maybe it is where God has placed you in your work environment, and you are there surrounded by people that don't believe or don't claim that Christ is the Lord of their life. Maybe all of your neighbors that surround your house, everyone that you're with, are non-Christians. And so what happens is you come into a room like this, or you hop online for the church service, and you want to be challenged. You want to be inspired for that 1 hour in your week, and then you leave and the other 167 hours of your week is spent with people who have a totally different worldview than you do. That's camp one. But then on the flip side, there's camp two. And those are the individuals who spend the majority of their time with Christians. I mean, maybe you work in a church or you work for a Christian organization or a parachurch ministry. Perhaps you're self-employed or you're retired or you're a stay-at-home mom. And so you have the ability to hang out with people that you want to. You have a say in that. And as a result, you're spending the majority of your time with Christians. But then there's this third camp, and I hope that this is the camp that all of us are working towards if we're not there already. This is where you spend time with both Christians and non-Christians, and you're gaining something from both of those associations that you have. From the non-Christian, it keeps your spiritual fervor. It keeps reminding you of the lost people that are in this world that need Jesus Christ. And in your time with the Christians, well, you're being strengthened. But it also rebukes you at times as you see there are some areas in your life that you're a little weak. There are some areas in your life that you need to work on, and you're challenged by those Christians. And I believe, like I said, as we work through today's text, we're going to be challenged to jump into group 3, camp 3, if we aren't there. So if you have your Bibles, if you have your devices, pull them out. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 9, and we're going to start in verse 9, but I want to give you some background about what is happening in the first 8 verses of this chapter before we get to our text today. You see, in Matthew chapter 9, right at the beginning, Jesus jumps into his boat, and he crosses the Sea of Galilee, and he lands back in Capernaum, which is kind of Jesus' home base at the current time of his ministry. And Capernaum was a wealthy city. It was wealthy because of the fishing industries, the trade industries. It was a city that was a cultural melting pot because it was greatly influenced by the Roman and the Greek cultures. And right after Jesus landed, some people brought Jesus a paralyzed man. And in Jesus' fashion, he heals that man right on the spot. He gets done healing him, and then he takes a walk. And that's where we pick it up in Matthew chapter 9, verse 9. It says this: As Jesus was going down the road, he saw Matthew sitting at his tax collection booth. Now, friends, we're reading out of Matthew, and Matthew is the author of the Gospel of Matthew that we're reading from, and he tells us that his name is Matthew. But if we look at the same story in the book of Luke, Luke gives us a little bit more insight about his name. Luke actually refers to him as Levi. So Levi was his given name, but now he was going by Matthew. You know the drill, especially if you're not really fond of your first name. You know, school's about ready to start. All the teachers, they call you by your given name, and then you're like, nope, I want to be called this. My given name is Gabriel. I go by Gabe, and so first day of school, Gabriel Rutledge, yep, I'm here, you can call me Gabe. And so his given name was Levi, but he was going by Matthew. You see, his parents named him Levi for a reason, because they expected him to grow up and become a priest or a rabbi. Now, who knows why it didn't happen, but evidently he just didn't make the cut in rabbinical school. And so now he found a financially lucrative position as a tax collector instead of this spiritual role that his parents had envisioned for him and had named him for. So Matthew probably lived with the fact his entire life that he was a disappointment to his parents. And that every time he met somebody in his community named Levi, it just underscored his failure. So now he just goes by Matthew to most. I wonder how many conversations with family members that Matthew encountered over the years like this one. Let's watch.
You.
Hello, Ima. Or Elisheva, I mean. Hello.
You.
I don't receive visitors myself. Is this a custom?
If your father were here, I couldn't do this.
Where is Alpheus?
I think a dog followed you.
He's with me. He'll stay out here if you let me in. Stay. Will Alpheus be home soon?
He's away. On a work trip.
Where will work take him? Does he no longer make leather goods?
His shop was robbed. Many of the shops have been. Crime is rampant, makes it very difficult to reopen.
He loved his shop.
But we still have a roof over our heads, which is more than some people can say.
You can ask me for money if you ever need it.
How can you say that?
It's quite common. I've seen many parents entirely dependent on...
Your father would sooner die than take your blood money.
I know you are ashamed of me, but your decision is irrational. Rome will continue to collect taxes no matter what. I'm skilled with numbers.
Did you come here to justify yourself?
No! Everything's like sand in a flood. The things I thought I knew to be true.
Are you in trouble?
Do you think that impossible things can happen? That overturn the laws of nature? That cannot be explained?
That is what people asked when you were a boy. Even the rabbis were astonished at your talent for reading, math, the way you could think faster than any other child. They thought you would be someone great.
Great at what? I'm rich. I have an armed escort. I'm trusted by the praetor of Galilee.
We never dreamed you would use the talent God gave you to bleed your people dry.
But have you ever seen anything miraculous?
Matthew.
My whole world. Everything I thought I knew. What if it's wrong?
I think you should go. You never even asked about your sister?
She looks well. I came to celebrate Shabbat a few weeks ago. Then I left. Goodbye, Ima.
Matthew was a disappointment. He was a failure to his mama. One of the reasons that Matthew was living such a lonely and isolated life up to this point is because of the profession that he chose to be in. Remember, when Jesus saw him, he was sitting at his tax collector booth. He would have been working for the Roman government. And let's not forget, friends, that Matthew was not a Roman himself. Matthew is disrespected by the Romans because he was Jewish, and on the other hand, he was hated by the Jews because he was a tax collector, and he would have been looked at as a traitor or a betrayer. I want to give you a description about what a tax collector was like back then. They were like a parasite. They were very self-serving. They were very greedy. They gave themselves a lot of money, and they grew rich at the expense of poor people by exploiting them and extorting money from them. more than the required tax that they were supposed to collect. And they lined their own pockets with what they had taken. And the higher up the chain you were as a tax collector, the more you could skim because there were lots of people underneath you. How many of us today could live day after day, week after week, month after month, and year after year, always feeling lonely, always feeling isolated? You never knew who your real friends were. And how could you live with the certain fact that even your family dislikes you? That's the state that Matthew probably lived in his whole life. Friends, he was not hanging out with his friends getting a watermelon sugar high. He was alone. He felt isolated. Maybe, just maybe, that's where you are today. Could it be because of this COVID-19 pandemic that we find ourselves in? You're feeling lonely. You're feeling isolated. Perhaps those feelings started way before March for you, but what has gone on in our country and in our state over the last 4+ months have heightened those feelings in you. If that's you, you are not alone. Many people, including Matthew, have felt that way. He's an outcast from society. Wealthy, absolutely, but he is a misfit. And evidently, as Jesus is there in Capernaum, going around and teaching, every so often, Matthew finds himself going to where Jesus is and just taking a few steps back in the crowd, standing on the outskirts and listening to Jesus. And maybe Jesus noticed him a few times. I believe that he probably had a few conversations with Matthew along the way. And then one day came the moment of truth. Matthew is sitting in his tax collector booth. He's taking taxes from people. He has their money in his hand, and Jesus walks by and says, let's just watch the scene unfold.
You see the Parthian foot races last night? Darius ran like a gazelle.
Jews don't go to foot races.
Your old friend Simon himself used to run the wagering tables.
We're not friends. Next.
Okay, fine. So you did not go to the races? You stay home?
I went to see my mother.
Ugh, that would put me out, too. She asked when you're going to give her grandchildren?
She didn't ask.
I thought your parents don't speak to you.
I had questions I couldn't ask anyone else.
A mother of a son with talent like yours should be proud.
She's ashamed that I could use the talent that God gave me against God. Next.
You're good at something. You found a way to make a living doing it. It's that simple.
Must be nice to live in a world so simply
We
ordered.
live in the same world, Matthew.
Next.
Besides, what else are you going to do with a mind like yours?
Matthew. Matthew, son of Alphaeus.
Yes.
Follow me.
Me?
Yes, you.
Whoa, 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 whoa. What are you doing?
You want me to join you?
Keep moving, street preacher.
Do you have any idea what this guy has done? Do you even know him?
Yes.
Listen, I said to... What are you doing? Where do you think you're going?
Guys, let me go.
Have you lost your mind? You have money. Quintus protects you. No Jew lives as good as you. You're gonna throw it all away.
Yes.
I don't get it.
You didn't get it when I chose you either.
But this is different. I'm not a tax collector.
Get used to different. I'm glad we passed by your booth today, Matthew.
Yes.
Shall we? We have a celebration to prepare for.
You will regret this, Matthew.
What's the tablet for? I grabbed it without thinking. You can put it back.
No, keep it. You may yet find use for it.
Get used to different. I love that line. Friends, right after the scene that we just watched, the text goes on to say this in verse 10. That night, let's just stop there. That night, notice that Matthew didn't waste any time. He didn't sit around and make a list of pros and cons about what God wanted him to do. It was the same day. That night, Matthew invited Jesus and his disciples to be his dinner guests, along with his fellow tax collectors and many other notorious sinners. It was an immediate action. It's as if Matthew wanted all of his fellow tax collectors to feel that same type of love, that same type of acceptance that he had received from Jesus. In the same house were guests who followed Jesus and guests who did not. I bet the first 20 minutes was a little awkward. Kind of reminds me maybe of my first ever junior high dance that I went to. I can just picture it in this room. You have on one side all of Jesus's disciples and Jesus himself hanging out. And then on the other side, all of these notorious sinners, all of these tax collectors, and they just keep eyeing each other, wondering who was going to be the first one to make the move. And if I had to guess, if I was a betting man, I would guess and bet that Jesus was the first one to make his way across the room and to reach out. You see, Matthew had done this gutsy move in hopes that the Christ followers would somehow rub off in a positive way to those who were not following him yet. And the text goes on, and as we see, as the night goes on and this party is going on, the Pharisees get frustrated at what they're seeing. And they ask a question that they believe is a very natural question to ask, because you see, a Pharisee would never eat dinner with someone of less moral standing than them. And so why would Jesus, why would this teacher, why would this rabbi be eating? The text says this: the Pharisees were indignant. Indignant, that's just a fancy word for showing anger or being annoyed. And they asked this question: why does your teacher eat with such scum? They asked this to the disciples. So friends, we have this party going on, and the Pharisees are getting frustrated. And what is happening in this story is that Matthew made an invitation to bring these two groups of people together. And in fact, I think if we really look at who is there, Matthew is making an invitation to three groups of people. And I think we need to take note of it. The first thing that we need to remember is that we need to invite the seekers and unbelievers. Who are these people? Well, you see, in Matthew's world, they were his fellow work associates. They were people who routinely cheated other people. They skimmed money off the top for themselves. They were the ones who exploited others for their own gain. But who are those people in our world? Well, you see, I think this invitation is for the college freshman who's about ready to go off to school. And come Thanksgiving, when they all come home, their faith is shaken a little bit because they've spent several weeks in a classroom in their comparative religions class. And they're starting to question, they're starting to seek what's really truth. You see, I think this invitation is for your coworker who grew up in a faith tradition, always feeling like they had to be at church on Sunday, but they've grown up now, they have their own family, and now they never darken the doorway of a church. Or this invitation is for your old high school friend who you have reconnected with on social media, whose religious status now reads agnostic. Friends, as I'm beginning to paint this picture, I hope you are starting to see people and names and faces of those in your life who hopefully you are trying to get close to, who you are trying to share with them the difference that Jesus has made in your life. You're trying to build that relationship. You see, during his time in Capernaum, Jesus must have had some informal time with Matthew prior to this calling. He had built some level of relationship with him. It was natural for Jesus to call Matthew by name, Matthew, son of Alphaeus. You see, he knew that Matthew was on the verge of a total transformation, vocationally, financially, socially. And one day, all of this comes together when Jesus says, follow me. A relationship had been formed, and Matthew says, yes, I will follow you. So we need to invite the seekers and the unbelievers. We also need to invite the outcast and the overlooked. You see, friends, in Jesus' day, the outcast, the overlooked, that was the tax collector. It was the prostitute. Who is that invitation for today? Well, there are a lot of people in our society and in our world who are cast aside and overlooked. It may be the poor. It may be the wealthy. Both get overlooked. Both get ignored. Matthew was wealthy, but not one single person had reached out to him yet. And the same is true in our culture. You see, people typically think, well, they have everything. They are so wealthy. Man alive, if they've got all of that money, they don't really need Jesus. And that's poor thinking on our part. Or we rationalize with the poor and we say, well, I don't really need to talk to them about Jesus. I mean, what they really need is money. What they really need is some food. What they really need is a job. No, friends, they need Jesus too. Sometimes the outcast in our world is just someone who hasn't yet learned the acceptable behaviors, and so they don't fit in. Sometimes they struggle with immorality, and they don't know any better because no one who claims to be a Christ follower has reached out to them, and they just get in the flow of society. And no one has explained the truths of God's word to them. Can I say something to you real quick, real blunt? Never be surprised when a non-Christian acts like a non-Christian. You see, when you see someone dressed inappropriately, or when you hear their language and you're at work and you see their behavior, don't just begin to look at them as the opposition. They are not the opposition. I love what I heard an old preacher say one time. Remember, non-believers are not the enemy. They are victims of the enemy. So don't be surprised when a non-Christian acts like a non-Christian. What should astound you is when a very mature believer acts like a baby Christian, or a mature believer acts like a non-believer. That disconnect should just stand out like a sore thumb to you. You see, friends, there have been plenty of people that have felt rejected by the world. They've even felt rejected by the church as a whole, and we need to reach out to them. We need to eat with them. We need to spend time with them, and we need to include them. You see, the third and final invitation is that we need to invite the discouraged and the downcast. Let's go back to the text. After the Pharisees asked the disciples, why does Jesus eat so much with these scum? Jesus actually speaks up himself. In verse 12, it says, when he heard this, Jesus replied, healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do. How many of you have ever picked up your phone, you dialed your doctor's office, and this is how the conversation goes? Hey, I'd like to talk with you. The person on the other end says, why? Well, I feel great. I just really feel well today, and I just wanted you to know that I'm not sick, and I want you to know that there are some days where I just feel amazing. Okay, great, thank you. No, friends, you see, we never have those conversations because we don't call a doctor when we're healthy. We call the doctor when we're sick. Friends, each one of us is sick, and we need Jesus. We are the discouraged. We are the downcast. Here's the point. Jesus said, if you classify these people as sinners, then they desperately need me. Friends, I don't know about you, but I desperately need Jesus. The truth of the matter is that every person that Jesus crossed paths with, every single one in his day, every single one of us, everyone needs Jesus because every single one of us is a sinner. And here is Matthew making this gutsy move to invite people from different walks of life, and he merges them together because he wants them to invest in each other, build relationships. The reason that Matthew was so gutsy is because of his FaceTime with Jesus that he had. So I want to challenge you with one challenge today, and this is it. Go be a Matthew. Go get out of your comfort zone. I don't care if you are in Camp 1 or if you're in Camp 2. I'm just asking all of us, including myself, to move to Camp 3. That's it. If you hang out all the time with non-Christians, I want you to start spending time with Christians. Take a step, get involved in a Bible study, work alongside, serve alongside other Christians. If you spend all of your time with Christians, I'm going to ask you to step out of your comfort zone and do what God expects of us. Go be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Salt adds a little bit of pizzazz. It's an agent for this decaying community. It's this purifying agent. Light dispels darkness. And I'm asking you to put yourself in situations and some friendships where you're going to have to bring them up instead of allowing them to pull you down. Let God's light, let the light of Christ shine through you. Friends, as we spend more and more FaceTime with Jesus, let's allow Jesus to change us, just like Matthew.